I'm delighted to welcome today Shonagh O'Malley, who is from Phoenix Family Transformations. I nearly said translation, transformations. Welcome, Shonagh.
Hi, Elaine. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. So you're based in West Island. I'm based in the Algarve in Portugal. And here we are talking on technology. How cool is that?
Isn't it amazing?
Yeah, it's wonderful. So tell us about Phoenix Family Transformations. What is it, and how did you come to be the creator of this?
So Phoenix Transformations was born out of my desire to help children. And in that desire, as I've worked in childcare for the last 20 years, I have learned through my studying and my experience, my hands-on experience, that very often it isn't the children that have the behavioral issues. It's the children learning to cope with how they're being parented and the circumstances that they're being parented in. And as somebody who grew up with a good dose of anxiety, and I was anxious most of my life, the correlation between how I was parented, my anxiety, and therefore the ability to parent my own child really became forefront to my mind. So I started Phoenix Transformations to help people to have that whole family transformation. It isn't a one-person job. It isn't just sitting the child on a timeout or on a naughty corner will resolve the issues. Very often it's the whole family. So that's where it all came from. And
right.
yeah.
Okay. So often you hear, I don't have a TV. I haven't watched TV for over 25 years.
Better off.
So yeah, absolutely. It's fake news, as dear Mr. Trump says. So I remember watching something about Super Nanny or something like that, where this woman was saying, naughty step and like you said, time out and so on and so forth. Why doesn't that work?
It can work for in a way. Absolutely, it can work. But when you are looking at it, when you consider, why is the child behaving the way you're asking them to behave? Are they doing it because of their acknowledgement of what the situation was? Are they doing it from a place of fear? Are they doing it because they're intimidated and they don't know any better? So yes, it can work is the answer, but the question is to how to get the most balanced behavior from your children, as opposed to dictating and creating a fear-based system was what I wanted to change. And a lot of the time that work is directed on the child and not on the parent.
So with you, with your experience, you said that you'd had anxiety and so on. How did you get out of that negative cycle then? I mean, when did you realise what was happening to you, and how did you get out of it? Okay,
so I was aware of my anxiety for a really, really, really long time, throughout my life, basically. As a child, I was always kind of one of those little waifs. I was very small. I kind of stood back and never liked to be in the forefront or in the center of attention. As I got older, I managed my anxiety. I would keep my environment and my friend circle safe. I wouldn't go to places where I felt uncomfortable, which basically meant anywhere. I wouldn't go and meet friends. I would have to meet them outside and all of these kinds of things. But it was really and truly when my son was born, and my dad died 9 months later. So that okay, so we have to rewind a little bit to explain this better. I got married when I was 39 and I moved from my hometown up here to Galway. I had never moved out of my hometown in my life. I got married to an amazing husband. We are absolutely fantastic. And I was lucky enough to fall pregnant really quickly. So my life had changed dramatically by the time my son was born, which for somebody with anxiety, when they manage all of their environment and their circumstances, this began to become a little bit overwhelming. I was managing, but it was getting harder and harder. So after my dad passed away, when my son was 9 months old, it kind of hit quite hard, and I went and I sought out help in the form of psychotherapy, and that was phenomenal. I got really, really great progress because the psychotherapy helped me to understand where this all came from. It was a very conscious brain understanding, logical, A plus B, C. That was fine. So I finished all that up in July of 2017-ish. And unfortunately, that September, I got diagnosed with breast cancer.
That's a bummer.
That's a bit of a bummer, all right.
And we'll come back to that. Yeah, because I've got a comment on that. Okay.
Jump back to that one.
Yeah.
So when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, it shook the ground from under my feet. I did not know all of this positivity that I was practicing and looking on the bright side seemed to have been like, what the actual, how could all of this have happened? So I basically had a crisis of faith, and I couldn't understand how this had all happened. And I came across a woman in Ireland, here in Ireland, called Moira Geary, and she teaches, her method is Wealthy Minds, and she teaches practitioners. Her way of changing your outlook, going into your subconscious mind, examining the root causes of your behaviors and your toxic traits, or whatever you would like to call them, and removing the emotion attached. And it was like somebody turned on the light. It was such an incredible feeling, because it was the first time in my entire life, and by this stage I was in my early 40s, that I had actually begun to feel not anxious, calm. It was no longer a pretense. It was no longer a shield that I was like the swan with the legs going and going, no, I'm fine. Don't look too closely, because I'm fine.
Yeah.
But once I had started doing that work for myself, I realized how much of a difference it was making to my family, to my friendships. The fact that I was coming from this really grounded, valuing myself place for the first time ever in my life. I had value. I began to have self-esteem. I was worthy. All of these things, which were just a fantasy up until that point. And I joined the two sides of my passion, which was helping children to grow up in a positive, encouraging environment, and helping people to get over the childhoods or their parenting, because I think you can't have one without the other. So voila, Phoenix Transformations was born.
Excellent. So what did you do before this?
I worked in childcare.
Right, okay.
I was a nanny. I worked in creche. I trained as a preschool teacher. So for 20 plus years, I was basically in every aspect of childcare in the early years settings.
And then when you get one of your own, it's different, isn't it?
Well, I worked with when I had my little boy, I worked with him as well. It was when I was going through chemotherapy and everything else, I couldn't manage, obviously, the day-to-day looking after children. So I had to give up that aspect of my career.
Okay, so how do you help people now? Do you do it via Zoom, in person? How does it work?
And with the pandemic, obviously, over the last couple of years, it's the majority has been Zoom. The methods I use, it's a talking method. We use a combination of neuro-linguistic programming and another method called QTT, Quantum Thinking Technologies, which was created by Moira Geary in Limerick. And through that process, we work with the subconscious mind and explaining to the client how the programming was set up. And so much of science now is catching up with this understanding of the mind-body connection that people are understanding it an awful lot more. And I liken it to somebody in a garden that needs, they're trying to create a new vegetable patch or a new flower bed, and they're doing a little bit of digging, and all of a sudden they realize there's a big boulder in the way. So they need to get somebody with a mini digger. And I like it. That's what I do. I come in with my little mini digger and I'm chuff and I pull out that big stone and I go about my business, and I let you carry on with creating whatever you want to create in your patch of beautiful garden, free of stones.
Brilliant. That's a great analogy, and conjures up a picture that's very easy to understand, because we think in pictures, don't we? We imagine in the picture format. Most
a lot of people do.
Yeah. And going back to the breast cancer, you said your dad had died. Your son was 9 months old. Your dad had died. And did you get when did the breast cancer diagnosis appear after your dad died? How long?
It was a year. It was just shy of a year and a half later.
Okay. I don't know if you know this, but statistically, women who get breast cancer have had a bereavement within the previous 2 years of their diagnosis.
There you go.
So it was the shock, the bereavement of your dad that would have brought this on. And there's lots of papers about it. I'm not, not sort of making it up. There's lots of papers. So there is a significant link. A friend of mine, her mother had breast cancer and surgery, and she went to visit her in the hospital ward. I'm going back years now. And there were 5 people in the ward, 5 women. And she said to my friend, we've just discovered that all of us have been bereaved in the previous 2 years, all 5 women. And I've since looked at that, so that's where that would have come from, and that links with what you were saying about the mind-body connection. And it's the emotional state. So the emotional state that we are in has a significant impact on our health, and also from what you're saying with the way we behave with our children, and the whole parenting thing. If we're in an emotional state, we can't manage ourselves, never mind help a child.
Absolutely. I would qualify that I think, yes, the death of my father certainly had an impact and contributed to the appearance of the breast cancer. But I do think there was more than that leading up to it. Yeah,
there's a whole, it's a whole puzzle. There's no one
absolutely
thing that causes anything.
Absolutely. I think from experience, I am very reticent to say that any one thing contributes to cancer showing up for anyone. I think
I agree. Yes, I'm in agreement with you. Yeah,
it's such unfortunately, it's such a mixed bag.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're not here to talk about cancer specifically, but I don't know if you know my story. I've had 4 different versions of cancer.
Wow.
And I'm a trained nutritionist, and I beat stage 4 cancer in 14 weeks back in 2015. So I know a bit about the topic, and I've done a lot of mentoring and support for others and so on and so forth. But yes, it's a whole mixed bag. It's the toxicity, whether it's physical, mental, environmental toxicity, whether we call that emotions, or lotions and potions. Yeah, exactly. There's a whole bundle. Yeah. So but I just wanted to mention that, because that's it's not a coincidence.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you haven't mentioned your mum in this. Did you have a mother in all of this?
I do. I still have one. She's technically present.
Okay.
And that is exactly, it comes to a point, if you have a toxic relationship. I chose to preserve my mental health by not engaging with my mom. So my mom had her own mental health issues, still has her own mental health issues. And as a woman just shy of 90 now, she came from a generation where those things weren't addressed, they weren't spoken of.
Yeah.
And knowing what I know now, she did with the best she did.
Yes.
What she had at the time.
Yeah.
However, I choose not to re-engage with that because I know she won't be able to change.
Yes. Yeah.
But for my mental health, I choose to preserve myself and my relationship with my son and not re-emerge for further.
Yes, yeah, I get that, absolutely. And again, that's another example of, it's not just one person, it's a whole combination of, and all our relationships are so different, aren't they? Relationships, there's a lot of talk about love at the moment, you know, we need to be in a more loving, kinder world, etc., etc. And there's so many different versions, because the love we have for our parents and our children and our partners and so on, our friends, it's all different, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you advise for parents who are having difficulties with the children and you know, maybe thinking that it's, you know, they've got a difficult child? Because I had a situation, my son is 12 years younger than my daughter, and he is autistic. He has Asperger's syndrome, which is a gift in some respects, but a curse in others. So I just thought I had a naughty boy, and because there was a 12-year gap, people said to me, oh, well, girls and boys are different, and there's the age, and you're an older mother now, and blah blah blah. So eventually at the age of 12 we had a diagnosis, which was such a relief. That I'm not the best mother on the planet, I know that, but it was a relief that there was a reason. So given the amount of autism that's in the world now, how do parents know if the child is being naughty, or if it's a condition of some sort, ADHD, autism, whatever the labels are being thrown around at the moment?
That is not my question to answer. I am not a psychologist, I am not a medical expert. And if you have any doubts as to whether or not your child needs a diagnosis, then I would suggest you first of all go and get help from a medical professional. Start out with your GP or whatever is available in your area, because as a parent, I think first of all you need to trust your instinct. First and foremost, if you think there's something, there probably is. So trust your instinct. Don't take no for an answer. Don't let people put you off just because it's more challenging. If you believe it, then go and find that answer. But I certainly wouldn't give any diagnosis or ways of diagnosing to anyone. All I would suggest is with behavior, I would look at certainly what are the triggers for the behavior for the child. You know, whether a child is autistic or not, they will have triggers for a behavior. If they are autistic, then being able to examine the triggers will help them regardless. If they're not autistic, being able to understand the triggers will also help them. So the methods don't necessarily change, but perhaps the delivery would change depending, and the delivery would change from child to child to child anyway, because no two children are the same. Yeah, and no parent is the same. So even if you had a technique that you would teach people, Mrs. Smith would implement it differently to Mrs. Brown. Exactly. And if Mrs. Smith comes from a place where she grew up in an environment where she was yelled at, and you know, there was physical smacking, as we used to call it a little while ago, that may be her go-to. So her triggered response, if her child's behavior is triggering her core beliefs, her triggered response could be yelling, going to slap, all of these responses. So me sitting here and going, no, you don't do this, isn't going to work, because consciously she knows not to do these things, but it's instinct. a smack flies off your hand before you even realize it, more often than not.
Yeah, yeah.
But what I do with the parent is I will look at where this comes from and I will release that instinct, so that not only do we work with setting up a new method of dealing and resolving conflict within the family, but we take out those instinctive reactions to allow for the new methods to actually take place and sit in.
Brilliant. You've got a very good way of explaining things, very, very clear. So
thank you.
For people who are maybe just being aware of this situation, we hear a lot about being thankful for our parents, but also being understanding of where they came from and their triggers. You mentioned with your mum, and I'm thinking about back with my parents and my grandparents, and I often think I've got another book in the making. I've published a few different things, and my current one is called In the Middle, because I see I'm in the middle of my children and my grandchildren, and looking back I remember my great grandparents, so wow. I'm kind of in the middle, and when I contrast the life and my experience growing up, I'm 65 now, so my experience growing up is so different to my grandchildren. It's almost like we're aliens to each other.
Absolutely.
We just don't understand each other. And it's very difficult in this modern world and the pace that everything is moving at, where all of us, we're all in overwhelm for one thing or another, every which way you look. So trying to be calm in a world that's pretty much a bit mad here, there and everywhere is very difficult, and obviously that will trigger behaviours and so on and so forth. So what you were saying about the way the parents have been conditioned, if you like, Absolutely. To then translate that, it's a very difficult shift to make, isn't it, for many people, even if they realize it.
It can be if you don't go and get somebody to help you. But to be honest with you, it is such a gentle transition when you do it well.
Right.
In my own experience, I grew up with a mom who was very emotionally, volatile. Emotionally volatile. So when my son was quite small and I was learning this new behavior, in fact, before I learned this new behavior, I found myself repeating exactly the same things that my mother would do. What do you mean I can't find my car keys or my lipstick? Yeah. Right, we're not going.
Yes.
Throw as the phrase goes, the baby was thrown out with the water, with the bath water. But I didn't understand what I was doing. This was just my conditioned behavior. This is how a mother behaves, because this is all I had ever seen. So in order to change that dig down really had to clear out that big old rock out of that garden space, so that I could look and examine what kind of a mother I wanted to be, as opposed to what a kind of a mother I was already pre-programmed to be. This method of learning that we have as humans, where we watch and learn from those around us, is an exceptionally clever design when it works. But like all the great designs, all it takes is for one little glitch to be going on, and that pattern can continue from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. That's why it's very common, and it's well researched. Children of alcoholics tend to grow up with problems with alcohol. Children of abusers tend to grow up to be abusers. And if you think about it consciously, you would imagine that would be the absolute opposite, because you've seen the damage it can do firsthand. How can it then? But the trouble is, 0 to 8 years old, the foundation years in a child's life, is also at the time before they have formed and developed their ability to examine thoughts. The word has just gone out of my head. God's gone. It'll come back to me. So all of the information from 0 to 8 just goes straight into the subconscious mind. They're critical thinking. There you go.
Yeah.
It came back to me. So if it's all going straight in all of the time, and one of the researchers, the most famous child researcher, Jean Piaget, explained how a schema was set up. And the schema is set up by observing those around you. So you absorb it, you assimilate it, and you move on.
Yeah, absolutely. The Jesuits have a saying, don't they? Give me the boy till he's 7 and I'll give you the man. So,
absolutely.
And most psychologists, so I specialize in disbehavioral profiling. So I come at this topic from a similar but different perspective to you. I mean, there's so many tools out there that we can use. And I use my expertise now towards the health side of things, how to understand one another, but how to understand yourself, so you don't put yourself in a situation where you're making yourself ill. But all the psychologists would agree, that I understand, that between 7 and 8.5 years old is when the lid is on. Once you've that's kind of your conditioning. So from 0, so from birth, well, in fact, even pre-birth, because
pre-birth,
you know, in the womb and what's happening with the mother and her environment,
adrenaline, hormones, all of those kinds of things. Yeah,
we're learning so much about this now. It's fascinating, isn't it? It really is fascinating.
I love it. I love it. It is. Yeah. If I go looking at research topics and things like that, I tend to go down rabbit holes for days and weeks, but I try not to.
Yeah, there's so much out there, and the more you learn, the more you want to learn, and then the more you investigate. And there's so many, you know, I don't use Google, I use other alternative search engines, because that way you get more truth there, rather than what, you know, mainstream want you to pick up. And it's just fascinating. There's so many different platforms now that you can dive into, and each of them will have a, you know, the different perspective. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's your big message then to say a new parent? What should they be aware of? Obviously they need to come and see you to make sure that they're the best parent ever. But that aside,
I think best parent ever, perfect parents, all of these kinds of things are myths that I would like to abolish. Firstly, there is no perfect parent, because there is no perfect human, there is no perfect baby. We are all intrinsically, you know, human, and by design we are not perfect. I think any parent that I would meet, first and foremost, would be trust your instinct. We were given an instinct, especially again, maternal instinct excludes men, and I think men can have a very strong mothering instinct as well. So I would follow your instinct, and I like to tell people that I help you let go of your bleep so you don't pass it on to your kids.
Yeah, cool.
You know, and that's what I think my message is. If you've got emotional stuff, baggage, we all know we've got baggage.
Yeah.
And I like to think of it as high functioning, middle, low, you know. If you feel like your baggage is getting too much for you, then find somebody to help you to let it go.
Yeah.
Because if you don't sort it out, it is impacting already on your life, and it will impact on your child.
Yeah, absolutely. I call it following our intuition, and I say that all the time to people with their health, because there's so many different, which is what I do these days, the health mentoring, and there's so many different pieces of advice out there that are all very good, but they're not necessarily right for you. So following your intuition, because your body knows, and your subconscious knows, you know, the mind body connection is huge. And so we actually have got the answers inside of us, but sometimes we just need that big digger to come along, the person with the digger to come along and help moving things out the way.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing with parenting a lot of the time, because everybody you know, I'll sit here and I'll say, follow your instincts. And I'll say, okay, I'll follow my instincts. But what happens when it gets to a point where my instincts are a little bit wonky? And I'm not sure, because this is how my parents treated me. And I'm not sure I want to do that. And okay, this is how my parents treated me. And I know I don't want to do that. So I don't know what to do from here on in. So I'm going to look at every book. And like you say, with health, with parenting, there's so many different methods and everything else being thrown at you. I would say that's when I think you need to work it yourself first. Forget all the books, forget all of the methods, because when you can really ground yourself in your true instinct, not your colored, you know, glasses that we all wear, then you can find that place. Then you can find whatever conflict resolution method that will suit you. But until you're in that place of confidence and security in yourself, you'll always be looking to outside sources, which is what will happen. And you'll start giving your child really mixed messages and different methods, which a child is going to get confused and they'll start reacting and everything. And then you'll be going, but the timeout seat doesn't work because you tried it for 3 days. But this didn't work because you only did it a week and you only did it half. Sorry, we have an expression in Ireland that I think isn't half-arsed.
Yes,
so I had to try and, but it's when you keep searching for an answer like that, can often be when the conflict comes from within yourself. So I think that's where the whole family transformation really is key. Because once you can find, so many of the parents I work with are afraid to use any method of discipline because they're afraid their children won't love them. And if I don't give them everything, they won't love me. And in fact, they're doing the opposite.
Yeah.
Children love boundaries. They love structure. They love routine. That's how they learn, because you need to hold them in this safe, very contained space, and you start to make that space bigger as they get older. But if that space is wide open at the beginning, as somebody who did not have a secure attachment to a mother growing up and from infancy, it will leave a lasting mark. It will. And it's how the person deals with that throughout their childhood and adulthood will really have that, how that impact is felt. So I think that that core of getting to your true self and then coming to the parenting from that place is the key.
If only we could be parents at the age of 40 plus, knowing what we know, having sorted our own chisel out, and then have children, that would be so much more helpful for everybody concerned. But that's not Mother Nature's way, is it?
Oh, you see, I like to take a different look on that, Elaine, and I think absolutely Mother Nature, but it's our minds and it's our creation that we hold on to all of this stuff. If you take it back to Mother Nature, who gets a bad rep for all of this, her design is really good. But it's when we add all of the baggage and career and working parents and pressure and society, that's where the fun starts.
Yeah.
That's
interesting. The older we get, the more we know, but the less we know, and the more we need to learn. It's just fascinating. Every day is a school day, as I say.
Oh, for sure. I wish I still had the confidence of my 6-year-old who tells me frequently, "It's okay, Mom, I know everything."
Oh, bless. Oh.
Yeah, that's like, good on you, kid. Go for it.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
But it's been lovely speaking with you, Shonagh. Absolutely enlightening for some parents listening to this, I'm sure.
Thank you so
for
much.
Me as well. It's been a real pleasure. How do people get hold of you?
I am at Shonagh O'Malley on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Clubhouse, look me up on socials. You're bound to catch me. And my email, shonagho'malley@gmail.com.
Can you spell that for the listeners in case they're not watching?
And I'll try and go slowly. It's SHONAGHOMALLEY. So that's Shonagh O'Malley @gmail.com.
Fabulous. Thank you so much today, Shonagh. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you so much.
And I just wanted to, anybody that does get in touch, I have a really great resource available that I would like to offer any of your listeners. My trigger toolkit, which helps people to work through emotional triggers, to find out where they came from and work through them and process them. So it's a great downloadable resource that I have available, free for any of your listeners that want to get in touch and access that.
Thank you. We'll put your email address underneath where this is posted so people can get in touch with you. So Shonagh O'Malley @gmail.com. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million, Elaine. It's been a pleasure.